When medical care becomes control inside prison healthcare that inmates can't refuse. In prison, there is one request that carries more weight than almost any other. Not a transfer, not a job assignment, not even a disciplinary appeal. It is a request for medical care. Because inside prison walls, health is not something you manage yourself. It is something you ask permission for. And that permission is never guaranteed, never immediate, and never fully explained. This documentary is not about dramatic emergencies or visible collapse. It is about waiting. The kind of waiting that stretches across days, weeks, sometimes months. The kind of waiting where pain does not disappear, symptoms do not resolve, and answers never arrive on time. The kind of waiting where the most frightening question is not what's wrong with me, but will anyone see me before it gets worse? In the free world, medical care is imperfect, but it is personal. You make appointments. You follow up. You seek second opinions. You decide when something feels urgent. In prison, that control disappears the moment the door closes. Every ache, every symptom, every concern must pass through a system designed not for speed, but for approval. Requests are written down. Slips are submitted. Boxes are checked. And then the silence begins. No confirmation. No timeline. No explanation. Just waiting. This is where medical care quietly becomes something else. Not treatment, but leverage. Because in prison, healthcare is not just about healing. It is about access. And access is controlled. Who is seen when they are seen, and how seriously they are taken depends on layers of decisions the inmate never witnesses. You do not walk into a clinic when you feel worse. You wait to be called, and you do not know when that call will come. For inmates with chronic conditions, the suspense never ends. Pain does not rise suddenly. It accumulates. Mobility does not disappear overnight. It fades. And each day without response adds pressure that cannot be released. This is a tension that defines prison health care. Not crisis, but uncertainty. An inmate submits a request and listens for their name. Days pass. Symptoms change. The body adapts in ways it should not have to. The mind begins calculating possibilities. Is this serious enough? Did they read my request? Should I submit another? Will that make it worse? There are no clear answers. And the most unsettling part is not denial. It is delay. Because delay creates doubt. Doubt creates fear. And fear grows strongest when nothing visible is happening at all. Medical rooms exist inside prisons. Equipment exists. Medication exists. Professionals exist. But access to them is filtered through procedure. And procedure does not respond to pain. It responds to paperwork. This is where suspense lives. In the gap between knowing something is wrong and not knowing when help will arrive. In the moment where an inmate realizes that seeking care too often can be interpreted as manipulation, but seeking it too little can make things worse. In the awareness that the body is changing while the system remains still. This documentary explores that invisible pressure, not through accusations, not through shock, but through the quiet mechanics of waiting, permission, and dependency. Because when medical care becomes something you cannot refuse, cannot schedule, and cannot speed up, it stops being a service. It becomes a form of control. And once health depends on approval, every unanswered request carries a question far heavier than pain itself. What happens if they don't respond in time? Medical care is a gate, not a service. In prison, medical care does not begin with treatment. It begins with permission. Before an inmate ever sees a nurse, a doctor, or a medical room, they must pass through a gate that does not exist in the free world. This gate is not guarded by a person standing face to face. It is guarded by process, slow, layered, and invisible. The first step is a request. An inmate writes down symptoms on a small form. There is limited space. No room for explanation. No place for uncertainty. Pain must be summarized into a few lines that will be read later by someone the inmate will never meet. Once the form is submitted, control leaves the inmate completely. There is no confirmation that the request was received, no indication of urgency, no estimated timeline. The inmate returns to their routine carrying the same symptoms, but now with something heavier added to them, expectation. This is where suspense begins. In the days that follow, the inmate listens more carefully during counts and announcements. Each name called carries a brief spike of hope. Each announcement that ends without their name deepens the uncertainty. Was the request reviewed? Was it approved? Was it delayed? There is no way to know. Medical care inside prison operates on prioritization, but the criteria for that prioritization are never visible to the people waiting. What feels urgent to an inmate may not appear urgent on paper. What feels manageable one day may feel frightening the next. But the system does not adjust in real time. It moves when it moves. This creates a subtle psychological shift. The inmate begins monitoring their own body differently. Every sensation is evaluated not just for pain, but for strategy. Is this serious enough to submit another request? Will that look excessive? Will repeated requests help? Or will they work against me? This internal calculation becomes constant. In the free world, worsening symptoms usually trigger action. In prison, worsening symptoms trigger doubt. The inmate must decide whether to wait longer or risk being seen as exaggerating. Neither option feels safe. What makes the system especially powerful is that it does not need to deny care outright. Denial is visible. Denial can be challenged. Delay, however, is quiet. It blends into routine. It stretches time without announcing itself. Days pass. The inmate continues working, continues standing for counts, continues following schedules that do not pause for discomfort. The body adapts, often in unhealthy ways, compensating for pain or limitation without relief. Meanwhile, the request exists somewhere else, filed, queued, waiting to be addressed. This separation between the body experiencing symptoms and the system processing paperwork creates tension that builds slowly. There's no release valve, no clear moment where waiting turns into resolution. And because medical care is framed as a privilege of access rather than an immediate service, the inmate has no leverage. They cannot escalate. They cannot demand attention. They cannot seek alternatives. They can only wait. Over time, the meaning of medical care begins to change. It is no longer something that restores health. It becomes something that controls time. The inmate learns that care arrives when the system decides it should, not when the body signals that it must. This realization reshapes behavior. Some inmates stop submitting requests altogether, resigning themselves to endurance. Others submit carefully worded forms, trying to anticipate what the system will respond to. Neither approach guarantees anything. This is a quiet power of the gate. It stands between need and response, without ever announcing itself as a barrier. It does not threaten. It does not punish. It simply delays and allows uncertainty to do the work. By the end of this phase, the inmate understands something deeply unsettling. Medical care in prison is not something you access when you need it. It is something you're allowed to receive when permission arrives. And until that permission comes, the waiting continues. Waiting lists that never end. After the request is submitted, the inmate enters a second system, one that has no visible doors and no clear exit. The waiting list. Inside prison, waiting lists are rarely acknowledged directly. They are not posted. They are not explained. And they are not experienced equally. For some inmates, waiting lasts days. For others, it stretches into weeks, months, or longer, without warning and without explanation. What makes this phase unsettling is not just the time involved. It is the uncertainty of position. Inmates are never told where they stand on the list. There is no number, no estimate, no confirmation that movement is happening at all. The list exists somewhere outside their reach, moving silently while their bodies remain in the same place. This turns time itself into a source of tension. Each day becomes a question rather than a progression. The inmate wakes up wondering whether today will be the day their name is called. They listen carefully for announcements. They watch others leave for medical appointments and return with paperwork, bandages, or prescriptions, visible proof that the system is working for someone, but not necessarily for them. This observation changes how waiting feels. It is no longer abstract. It becomes comparative. Why were they seen first? What did they write that I didn't? Did I describe my symptoms clearly enough? The inmate replays the wording of their requests in their mind, imagining how it might have been interpreted. A phrase that felt accurate at the time now feels inadequate. A symptom that seemed minor now feels serious. The mind fills the silence with second-guessing. This is where suspense deepens, because waiting is not passive in prison. It is active mental labor. The inmate monitors their symptoms daily, sometimes hourly. They track changes, improvements, setbacks. They test movements carefully. They adapt posture. They ration energy. All of this happens while the waiting list remains invisible and unmoving. There is no signal that says, "You are close," and there is no signal that says, "You are far." The system offers no reassurance. This uncertainty creates a quiet pressure to decide whether to submit another request. Doing so feels risky. Too many requests can be seen as unnecessary. Too few can leave the issue unresolved. The inmate is forced into a guessing game with real consequences. Some choose to wait longer, hoping patience will be rewarded. Others submit a follow-up, carefully altering their language, trying to sound neither desperate nor dismissible. Each choice carries anxiety because the rules governing success are never explained. Meanwhile, the body continues its own timeline. Pain does not wait politely. Symptoms do not pause. Conditions do not remain static. But the waiting list does. This mismatch between physical experience and administrative pace creates a sense of helplessness that builds slowly. There is no dramatic breaking point, no single moment when everything changes. Instead, tension accumulates quietly day after day. Even routine begins to feel heavier. Standing for long periods becomes more difficult. Work assignments demand energy that the body struggles to provide. Sleep becomes inconsistent as discomfort competes with exhaustion. None of this is visible on the waiting list. The list does not know how the inmate feels today. It only knows that a request exists. What makes this system especially powerful is that it encourages silence. Inmates learn quickly that complaining too openly can work against them. The culture around medical waiting rewards restraint. Those who endure quietly are seen as manageable. Those who express frustration risk being perceived as difficult. This discourages urgency. The inmate learns to live with the unknown rather than challenge it. They normalize discomfort. They adjust expectations. They tell themselves that tomorrow might be different, even when nothing suggests it will be. This is where the waiting list does its quiet work. It teaches patience not as a virtue, but as a necessity. It reshapes how inmates think about their bodies, their needs, and their limits. Over time, the idea of immediate care feels unrealistic. Delayed response becomes a default expectation. And because nothing overtly negative happens in a single moment, the system appears functional from the outside. Care is not denied. Appointments do happen. Names are called, just not predictably. By the end of this phase, the inmate understands something deeply unsettling. Waiting is not a temporary inconvenience inside prison health care. It is the system's natural state, and as long as the waiting continues without explanation, suspense remains unresolved, hanging quietly over every day that passes without a response. Pain management and permission. Pain inside prison does not arrive dramatically. It settles in. It becomes part of posture, part of movement, part of how an inmate learns to exist within the day. And unlike pain in the free world, it is not something an inmate can immediately respond to. It is something that must be justified. Inside prison health care, pain is not automatically treated. It is evaluated, measured, interpreted, and most importantly, approved. This is where suspense deepens, because pain is invisible on paper. When an inmate submits a medical request, they are asked to describe pain using limited words and limited space. Sharp or dull, constant or intermittent, mild, moderate, severe. These categories feel precise, but they flatten experience. What an inmate feels in their body must be translated into language that the system recognizes as actionable. And the system does not respond to pain itself. It responds to how pain is framed. This creates a dangerous gap. An inmate may feel increasing discomfort, but hesitate to describe it too strongly, worried that exaggeration will be suspected. Another may downplay symptoms, try to appear reasonable, only to discover later that restraint works against them. There's no guidance on how to strike the right balance. Pain becomes negotiation. Once an inmate is finally seen, the dynamic does not immediately shift in their favor. Medical interactions inside prison are brief, structured, and procedural. Appointments are often limited in time. Questions are asked quickly. Observations are recorded efficiently. The inmate is expected to explain what hurts, calmly, clearly, and without emotion. This expectation alone is difficult. Pain changes how people speak. It changes patience. It changes focus. But prison healthcare rewards composure, not distress. An inmate who appears too emotional risks being misunderstood. An inmate who appears too controlled risks being dismissed. Again, there is no clear guidance. Even when pain is acknowledged, treatment is not guaranteed. Pain management inside prison operates under layers of restriction. Medications that are common outside may be limited, substituted, or unavailable. Decisions are shaped by policy as much as diagnosis. The inmate is not told what options exist. They are told what is allowed. This is where permission becomes central. Treatment is something granted, not chosen. Follow-up is something scheduled, not requested. Adjustments happen slowly, if at all. The inmate leave the appointment with fewer answers than expected, carrying instructions they did not help shape. And then the waiting begins again. Pain does not pause during this process. It continues during work assignments. It follows the inmate into sleep. It returns each morning without asking permission. The suspense comes from not knowing whether relief is coming, or whether what has been provided is all that will ever be offered. Some inmates learn to manage pain quietly, altering how they move and work to avoid drawing attention. Others attempt to communicate changes, only to find themselves repeating the same explanations to different people at different times. Consistency is hard to maintain when pain itself is inconsistent. What makes this system especially tense is that escalation is unclear. In the free world, worsening pain often leads to more aggressive treatment. Inside prison, worsening pain can simply mean more documentation, not more care. The inmate wonders, is this worse enough to report again? Will reporting again help or hurt? Will I be seen as persistent or problematic? These questions linger every day. Pain management becomes less about healing and more about endurance. The inmate learns to measure pain not by intensity, but by survivability. Can I get through today? Can I finish my assignment? Can I sleep tonight? This reframing is not natural. It is learned, and once learned, it is hard to unlearn. The system does not need to deny pain outright to control behavior. By requiring permission at every stage, it teaches inmates to ration their own suffering, to delay asking for help, and to lower expectations of relief. This creates a quiet but powerful form of suspense. Not will something terrible happen, but how long can this continue before something changes? And because pain rarely announces its breaking point, the tension never resolves cleanly. It stretches across days and weeks, settling into routine just like the waiting list before it. By the end of this phase, the inmate understands a difficult truth. Pain in prison is not something you treat when it begins. It is something you live with until permission allows it to be addressed. And sometimes, permission arrives only after the body has already paid the price. Chronic illness behind bars. Some medical problems do not arrive suddenly. They stay. Inside prison, chronic illness does not announce itself with urgency. It unfolds gradually, settling into the background of daily life. And that makes it harder to address, harder to explain, and far easier for the system to postpone. This is where suspense becomes constant, because chronic illness does not fit neatly into forms or timelines. An inmate with a long-term condition wakes up each day already carrying uncertainty. Symptoms fluctuate. Some days feel manageable. Others do not. There is no clear moment when something becomes an emergency, only a slow realization that things are not improving. In prison healthcare, this creates a dangerous gray zone. Chronic conditions are rarely treated as urgent. They are managed, monitored, placed into categories that suggest stability, even when the inmate does not feel stable at all. The system assumes time is available, even when the body suggests otherwise. This assumption changes everything. Appointments are spaced far apart. Follow-ups are scheduled weeks or months into the future. Adjustments to treatment happen slowly, if they happen at all. The inmate is told continue, to wait, to observe, and so the waiting becomes long-term. Unlike acute pain, which at least carries the possibility of escalation, chronic illness often disappears into routine. The inmate continues working, continues standing for counts, continues meeting expectations designed for bodies that function normally. The body adapts in ways it should not have to. Movements become careful. Energy is rationed. Pain is anticipated before it arrives. The inmate learns their limits not through guidance, but through trial and error. This adaptation carries its own suspense, because each adjustment feels temporary. Each compromise feels like something that might work today, but fail tomorrow. The inmate lives in a constant state of monitoring, not just symptoms, but consequences. If I slow down, will that be noticed? If I ask again, will it matter? If I endure longer, will it get worse? These questions repeat daily, without resolution. Chronic illness also creates a unique form of isolation. Unlike visible injuries, long-term conditions are often invisible to others. Fellow inmates may not understand why someone struggles. Staff may not see immediate signs of decline. This invisibility makes advocacy difficult. The inmate must repeatedly explain a condition that does not look dramatic. Each explanation risks being interpreted as complaint rather than necessity. Over time, many inmates stop explaining altogether. Silence becomes easier than persuasion. The system unintentionally reinforces this silence. By responding slowly, by spacing appointments far apart, by offering limited adjustments, it teaches inmates that patience is expected, even when patience comes at a cost. Suspense deepens because there is no clear endpoint. With acute issues, there is at least a hope of resolution, treatment, recovery, relief. With chronic illness, the goal shifts. The inmate stops hoping for improvement and starts hoping for stability. Not better, just not worse. This is a dangerous shift. It lowers expectations. It narrows focus. It makes delays easier to accept because improvement feels unrealistic anyway. The system benefits from this resignation, even if unintentionally. The longer a condition persists without significant intervention, the more it becomes normalized, both by the inmate and by the system managing them. And normalization hides risk, because chronic illness does not pause for normalization. It progresses quietly. It compounds. Small declines accumulate into significant limitations over time. Yet each decline, taken alone, rarely feels urgent enough to trigger immediate response. This is the suspense of chronic care behind bars. Not the fear of sudden collapse, but the fear of gradual loss. The fear that by the time something is taken seriously, it will already be too late to reverse. The inmate lives with this awareness daily. They measure time not by calendars, but by capacity. What could I do last month that I cannot do now? What effort feels harder than it used to? What pain lasts longer? These changes are noticed long before they are acknowledged. And because the system moves slowly, the inmate learns to live inside uncertainty that never resolves. There is no moment of clarity, no reassurance that things are being addressed in time, only continued waiting. By the end of this phase, the inmate understands another unsettling truth. Chronic illness in prison is not managed around health. It is managed around tolerance. As long as the body can still function, even poorly, the system feels no urgency to change its pace. And that realization adds a new layer of suspense to every day that follows. When treatment is delayed, not denied, one of the most confusing moments in prison healthcare is realizing that medical care has not been refused. It has simply been postponed. At first, this distinction feels minor. The inmate tells themselves that delays are temporary, that the system is busy, that care will come eventually. This belief is necessary in the beginning. Without it, waiting would feel unbearable. But over time, a troubling pattern emerges. Appointments are scheduled, then rescheduled. Follow-ups are mentioned, then quietly pushed back. Treatment plans exist on paper, but not in practice. Nothing is officially denied. And that is precisely what makes this stage so difficult to understand. In the free world, denial is clear. It can be challenged. It can be appealed. It can be questioned. Delay, however, operates in a gray space. It offers just enough hope to prevent resistance, while withholding enough action to maintain control. This is where suspense reaches a different level, because now the inmate is no longer waiting for permission. They are waiting for follow-through. The system has acknowledged the issue. The problem has been documented. A response has been initiated. And yet, nothing seems to move forward. This creates a new kind of anxiety. If care has been approved, why hasn't it happened? If treatment is planned, why does it feel so distant? If something goes wrong, will anyone notice in time? These questions grow heavier with each passing week. The inmate begins to realize that delay functions as a filter. Conditions that worsen quickly tend to surface again. Conditions that deteriorate slowly risk being absorbed into routine. The system responds most readily to visible escalation, not gradual decline. This realization changes behavior. Some inmates begin pushing harder, submitting additional requests, trying to remind the system that they are still waiting. Others do the opposite. They withdraw, convinced that persistence will only make them appear difficult. Both approaches carry risk. Pushing too hard can lead to being labeled uncooperative. Withdrawing too much can allow conditions to worsen unnoticed. There is no safe strategy. This is where suspense becomes psychological rather than procedural. The inmate is no longer waiting passively. They are calculating timing, weighing consequences, and trying to predict how the system interprets behavior. Every decision feels like it could tip the balance in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, the body continues its own progression. Pain patterns change. Energy levels fluctuate. Symptoms that were once occasional become constant. These changes are rarely dramatic enough to trigger immediate response. They sit just below the threshold of urgency, uncomfortable, concerning, but not alarming enough on paper. The system moves slowly because it can. There is no external pressure to resolve delay. As long as care has not been denied outright, accountability remains diffuse. No one point in the process carries full responsibility for outcome. This diffusion of responsibility is critical. It allows delays to extend without appearing intentional. Each step has a reason. Each postponement has an explanation. Taken individually, none of them seem unreasonable. Taken together, they create paralysis. The inmate begins to sense this pattern long before they can articulate it. They feel trapped inside a process that acknowledges them without helping them. The recognition is subtle, but once it settles, it changes expectations permanently. Hope becomes cautious. Trust becomes conditional. Patience becomes forced. This is the moment when many inmates stop expecting improvement. They begin measuring success differently, not by whether they feel better, but by whether they can endure another day without significant decline. Not by whether treatment is effective, but by whether it prevents complete breakdown. This recalibration is not natural. It is learned, and it is one of the most lasting psychological effects of delayed care. The suspense here is quiet but relentless. There is no climax, no confrontation, no clear turning point. Instead, tension lingers in question that never receives a direct answer. If they haven't helped yet, will they? And because the system never clarifies the difference between delay and denial, the inmate is left suspended in uncertainty. They cannot challenge what has not officially happened. They cannot appeal what has not officially been refused. They can only wait. By the end of this phase, the inmate understands a critical truth. In prison healthcare, delay can be just as powerful as denial and far harder to confront, because delay does not say no. It says not yet, and not yet can last indefinitely. When waiting becomes a sentence, by the time an inmate reaches the end of the medical process inside prison, nothing feels dramatic anymore. There is no clear moment when the struggle ends. No announcement that says care has finally arrived in full. No line that separates waiting from resolution. Instead, the system settles into something quieter, something that feels permanent. Waiting becomes normal. The inmate no longer listens for their name with urgency. They no longer expect answers quickly. They no longer believe that discomfort alone is enough to trigger action. What once felt temporary has become routine. This is how prison health care completes its transformation, not by refusing care outright, not by creating visible crisis, but by reshaping expectations so completely that delay feels inevitable. Inside this system, health is no longer something an inmate actively protects. It is something they manage around. Pain is scheduled into the day. Limitations are planned for. Energy is rationed. The body becomes another part of the prison routine, something to be endured rather than restored. This is a quiet cost of dependency. When every step of care requires permission, the inmate stops asking whether something should be addressed and starts asking whether it is worth asking at all. That shift is subtle but profound. It changes how people think about their own well-being. It lowers the threshold for what feels acceptable to live with. And that change does not disappear when treatment finally arrives. Even when appointments happen, even when medication is adjusted, even when conditions stabilize, the memory of waiting lingers. The awareness that help came slowly and might come slowly again stays with the inmate long after the immediate issue is addressed. This is what makes prison health care such a powerful form of control. It does not rely on punishment. It does not rely on force. It relies on time. Time stretches uncertainty. Time wears down urgency. Time teaches endurance where advocacy should exist. From the outside, the system appears functional. Requests are processed. Appointments occur. Care is technically available. But from the inside, the experience is defined by what happens between those moments. The silence, the delays, the unanswered questions. That is where suspense truly lives. Not in the fear of sudden harm, but in the fear of slow decline. Not in the absence of care, but in the uncertainty of access. Not in denial, but in delay. Understanding this changes how we think about prison health care. It forces us to look beyond outcomes and examine process, beyond whether care exists, and toward how it is experienced. Because control does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits. And for the people living inside the system, waiting becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes part of the sentence, one that stretches quietly across days, months, and years, shaping bodies and minds long after the paperwork is complete. This documentary is not about assigning blame. It is about understanding how systems work when time is unevenly distributed, and how power operates most effectively when it never has to say no. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.